Hello and welcome back to Narrative Wargamer. I am Tony Rhodes, and today I've got something a little different for you here on the channel, something we've not sort of done before, but which I'm hoping to start occasionally doing, and that is a book review. So I think things like codex reviews are quite common and familiar formats to a lot of people on YouTube, or at least obviously Warhammer players who watch stuff on YouTube. And typically, if you've listened to the Narrative Wargamer Podcast before, or generally know anything about the channel, that's not really what we often go in for. We're not all in for chasing on the latest releases and meta changes and breaking codexes down by detachments and stratagems and everything else. But that doesn't mean there aren't certain products and releases from Games Workshop that we are excited and interested in. And today we've got just one of those products. So the other day, I finally got a hold of a copy of Crusade Pariah Nexus. So again, for any of you that have watched the battle reports that we've done here on the channel occasionally, most of the missions that we've played since, well, basically all the missions since the start of 10th edition, have been taken from the Crusade Tyrannic War book. Now, when that came out, I wasn't quite in a position to be able to do a video like this, so I didn't get a chance to review it, but today instead I can now do a review for Pariah Nexus. So I've had it for a couple of days, and I've basically gone through the content in here, and I just want to tell you all my thoughts on it and whether or not I think it's worth picking up. I mean, spoiler, it is. So basically, if you're unfamiliar, these Crusade books are the current sort of like release pattern for 10th edition for narrative play content. Now, Games Workshop likes to put this Crusade label on what I consider most of their narrative content these days. And I think it's great, and it doesn't have to be all about Crusade, but these are a great resource for these sort of things. So obviously, this being a Crusade book, this does include all the core rules for Crusade, which, funnily enough, I don't believe you're getting the core rules at the moment. I don't actually own a copy of the 10th edition core book because I just use the app these days because it's pretty great for, just accessing your rules references and stuff. But I believe unless you've got the Leviathan version of the core book, it doesn't actually come with the Crusade rules. So if you are interested in playing Crusade, and I do intend to do another whole different video on Crusade itself, so look out for that in the future, because this is not a how to play Crusade. That'll come later. This is about this particular book. So obviously, it does include those core Crusade rules, so if you do want to learn how to play it, it's all self-contained in here. You don't need any other publication, you don't need the previous Tyrannic War book to be able to play with your current Crusade rules. And it does include as well a selection of updated battle traits and Crusade relics, which includes some of the units that didn't get battle traits in the Tyrannic War book, notably things like monsters. That was because the Tyrannic War had a whole Monster Hunter expansion on Crusade rules, so that did that instead. But in here, you've got battle traits for monsters. Yay! However, one of the other things that it does contain is the latest rendition of what is sort of Games Workshop's standard multi-game campaign system that they've been using and sort of developing throughout early 9th edition through now to as we have in 10th edition. So if you are looking to play campaign games and like link a series of games or take games that you play down at your local club or with your friends, and you want to actually play, a narrative campaign, it doesn't have to be Crusade rules. This accommodates for that, so you can get that in Pariah Nexus. So they have the Pariah Nexus campaign, and basically it goes through a series of systems for having player alliances, campaign phases, and as players play games throughout the campaign phases, you earn campaign points and strategic points, and these accumulate over the length of the campaign and eventually provide you with a campaign result of alliance winners. And if that's something that you want to try in your playgroup and you've been looking for a way to introduce some campaign rules, this is worth picking up just for that. And one of the important things about this book and the kind of content in it is that you don't need to have a copy per person, not really. If you want to play in your playgroup or play at your local club, you can probably get a copy for the club, or your group of friends, and you only need to bring one copy along to game day, and then you've got all your missions in here, and you've got all your campaign rules, and it's just really going to expand your experience of 10th edition play if you want something outside of Leviathan deck. Which, that is one of the other big reasons why I love these books, and I highly recommend people picking them up, is the missions. Because, again, while they're sort of framed within the context of if you play these in a Crusade, these are Crusade missions, they're also just fun missions. They're not the Leviathan deck. They're not composed like that in any way. Just mission details, all written out. Deployment, objectives, scenario rules, all of it. And there's 12 new Strike Force missions in here and 3 new Onslaught missions. And they're really, really interesting. These are the sort of things that I play here on the channel. These are the sort of things I play in my casual games with friends. This is what I love to break out when it comes to play the game. And for people who are perhaps bored or disinterested in the primaries, secondaries, scoring system of 9th and 10th edition, this gives you a little way of breaking that out a bit. Because, yeah, obviously there are primary scoring systems in these, but there are no secondaries. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, if you've listened to that, but that's because in Crusade, you don't have secondaries for victory points. Instead, if you are playing linked Crusade games, you have secondaries called agendas, and those are for earning experience on your units. And that's great for Crusade. But that means you can just pick up these missions just to play as one-off games, and there are no secondary scoring involved. It's just the primary, which lends itself more to this natural idea of achieving what the narrative purpose of the mission is, as opposed to going and standing in table quarters and doing actions on objective markers and stuff like that. So, and some of them really interesting. I mean, look at this one. Look at this deployment map. That is not something you would get in a standard game of 40k. How cool is that? I love these sort of missions. They're really, really engaging. So yeah, I think it's probably worth picking up just for the missions alone. I mean, look, deadly fissures, horrible environment stuff that's going to be affecting people if you try to claim these objectives. Very classic narrative wargamer stuff. Yeah, it's great. The other thing that is a really unique and new addition to Pariah Nexus, or specifically this book, is the idea of the strategic footings. And this is basically, it's an additional little step in the pre-battle setup, which again, you can use outside of Crusade. But it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors system, where players choose a strategic footing in secret, be it an aggressive stance, a defensive stance, or a balanced stance, basically how you're intending to apply your forces to the battle ahead. And then you reveal those decisions before deploying armies. And basically there's a little table matrix right here that, based on the decisions made by players A and B, tells you who's going to be the attacker and who's going to be the defender. Which is especially interesting considering a lot of these missions, some of them have a predetermined attacker or defender takes the first turn, and some of them have deployment setups where, say, most of the objective markers are in the defender's half of the table, because there are their objectives there. And yeah, it's a really cool system. And the other thing that it provides is it can provide one player, potentially, depending on the outcome, with an advantage in the mission. And every mission details a small advantage, which basically often revolves around giving either an additional rule to a unit for the game. So, for example, you might be able to have something that can deep strike that can't normally, or a unit gains infiltrate. There's a few ones where you can use a certain stratagem for free once per game. But also, some of them relate to the objectives, and usually there'll be like a mechanic or system that's in play for the objective markers for the game. And if you're the player that won the strategic footing and can choose to use the advantage in one of the turns to basically either double down or prevent the mission mechanic from taking effect that turn. So, for example, the mission Polarizing Energies. This one, we have 4 objective markers. but only 2 of them are active in any given game round, battle round even. So pairs A are active in the first turn, and then pairs B are active in the second turn, because they alternate, because they're polarizing energies and the polarity is changing. But the advantage for the player who has advantage can choose once per game for them to not flip that battle round. So if they're in a really strong position and they like holding the objectives they've currently got, they can keep them there. So yeah, if you are interested in playing something a bit different, something a bit unusual, something a bit more narrative, I highly recommend picking up this book, because mostly just because of the missions. The mission selection is just great. And the same can be said for Crusade Tyrannic War. Again, a whole set of unique missions in there, just as fun, just as usable outside of Crusade if that's what you want. I don't know if it's still generally available, but if you can find it somewhere and pick it up, also a good pickup. And then finally, if you are picking this up because you are a regular or experienced player of Crusade, there is an expansion to the general Crusade rules in here as well. So this is all revolving around Blackstone Discovery. And basically, if you know your Crusade stuff, then there's a selection of additional battle traits and relics which are purchased with Blackstone fragments. And you acquire Blackstone fragments through completing special agendas or mission conditions. Quite often, the missions in here, when you hold objectives at the end of the game, they often pay out with an amount of Blackstone fragments if you're using that in your Crusade missions. Same with the victory bonuses. So yeah, like basically you'll get an additional campaign-wide resource to track, and if you're playing these missions and using these agendas, you'll acquire Blackstone fragments. I think even the campaign phases and rewards pay out with Blackstone fragments in this. And you can use those to purchase some unique Crusade relics and battle honors, such as the Noctilith armament for 20 Blackstone fragments, which basically means you get to pick one melee weapon of the bearer that you give this relic to. And once per game, you can activate this special ability, and if you do, then their weapon ignores invulnerable saves for that turn. How cool is that? So if you have played a Crusade campaign before and you're looking to do a new one, perhaps the Pariah Nexus with its whole Blackstone discovery system would be a nice next step to take. So yeah, just to, summarize my thoughts on this, guys, basically, as with the previous Crusade Tyrannic War book, I think that Crusade Pariah Nexus is a great pickup if you're looking for an expanded range of missions, some new and interesting games of 40k that you can play. If you want to get into Crusade, this is a great pickup because obviously you get the core Crusade rules in there. If you're practiced with Crusade, this gives you a new expanded campaign system to add Blackstone discoveries and fragments to your Crusade forces as they grow and develop. Great for any club or group of friends who want to pick it up as a group purchase, because again, I don't think you need an individual copy of this. If you've got that one person in your group who likes being the GM or the campaign organizer or whatever, this will be ideal for them to add to their personal collection. But again, if they don't want to perhaps pay out for that themselves, then make it a group purchase, and between you all it's not going to cost that much. And finally, of course, there's several pages of brand new lore as well about the Pariah Nexus, which I have not had chance yet to dive into, but I am very much looking forward to it. So I love making our lore quizzes for the podcast based on these books. The Tyrannic War one was hilarious. The old Warzone books from 9th edition were so much fun. And by the looks of it, Pariah Nexus, I've had a quick skim, but there's there's various interesting characters involved by the looks of it, so I'm excited to read through this, put together a whole brand new lore quiz for a future podcast episode, hopefully in the near future, and just really enjoy the lore of Pariah Nexus. So yeah, definitely worth picking up, I would say. And with that, that's our first real book review here on the channel, and hopefully that gives you a little more of an insight as to what you get in here. Hopefully, if you've been on the fence about whether to pick it up or not, this gives you a little bit more of an idea of what's involved and what there is to get out of it for you. And hopefully there's enough there and enough interesting things for you to pick it up and enjoy it, because I know I'm going to have a lot of fun with this in my future games for the next probably 3 to 6 months until we get our next Crusade book, no doubt. And yeah, I wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who is interested. And please, stay tuned here on the channel for an upcoming How to Play Crusade video. So I'll be breaking down the finer details and finer points of how Crusade mechanically works, and some recommendations for how I personally suggest you play the system and to get a better quality of life out of it. And yeah, keep an eye out for the podcast. Say lore episode coming soon, another fun lore quiz, and yeah, hopefully some future battle reports using this as well. So all fun stuff to look forward to, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time. So until then, guys, this has been the Narrative Wargamer, helping you discover more ways to play 40k.